Look at this. This is freaking sick right here. Here they are side by side, equally geared. Movement speed scaling Roa versus attack speed scaling Whirling Slash. If you want to move as fast as you possibly can in this game, you're not using movement speed as a way to do it. I don't know how I can make it any clearer than this. It took me half the time to reach the end. What is going on, guys? Snoo here. Today I have a very important video for you. Today I'm shining a spotlight on one of the biggest pieces of misinformation that currently exists in the PoE2 community at large. It has everything to do with moving fast, speed. How do you move fast? How do you scale it? Movement speed is the most important stat in the game. Have you heard that before? Well, it couldn't be further from the truth. It wasn't true in 0.1. It wasn't true in 0.2, and it most certainly isn't true in 0.3. Now more than ever, thanks to the recent additions, tools that we have easy access to, including weapon swap, all kinds of brand new support gems. And if you're following the trends, you'll see that everything is moving in this direction, away from movement speed and towards attack speed as a primary mode of scaling your movement. Now I want to take just a second here to highlight a comment section of a recent video I did. I could have plucked any one of these videos from 0.3. And what you'll find is the comment section is uncharacteristically positive and full of gratitude from the players for everything I'm showing, the speed, the farming, the build, the way to move fast. It's turning a lot of heads. A lot of players were completely in the dark about what it means to move fast in this game. And that remains to be so, which we're about to see. I simply show you this because I know what it's like to make content. I know what kind of comments I'm expected to have based on the amount of value that I bring in a video. We seriously have a lightning in a bottle situation here. This needs to get out, and players need to know what's up. And so I'm just showing you this in front of the video to give you some added credibility that everything you're about to hear from henceforth is the real deal. Let's take you back to the PoE Ninja page, where we're going to very briefly examine the current state of things, the meta, as it were. You know, the very upsetting information where people get angry that there's always a build, a super outlier build. GG, why can't you balance your game? There's just always a character that's stronger, better, faster, etc. than any others. Well, long story short, that's because certain things just end up being more popular. They get popularized, okay? I mean, this really has very little to do with how good the build actually is at any one given moment. Evidenced by the fact that I played off meta in 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3, and every single time I looked at footage of my build versus the footage of whatever the meta was at the time, and the very best that it had to offer, it always left me relatively unimpressed, and I was pretty happy with what I had done. To be fair, in 0.1 it was attribute stacking, in 0.2 it was accuracy stacking, and in both of those cases, people would sometimes argue, hey Snoo, it's not really that fair to compare a deep in-game accuracy or attribute stacking build with the meta build because the meta applies to beginning, middle, and end. And so if you can really only look at the end versus the end, you're not really doing that comparison justice. Okay, I like that argument actually because it's going to be really favorable for me in this video. My how the tables have turned, as we're about to see. Let's take a look at the Deadeye. The Deadeye is playing Lightning Arrow. Okay, that's not the big issue here. The big issue is that 61% of them are riding Roa. Which means at least 61% of them believe that movement speed is the best way to scale movement in this game. Very unfortunate. I have to go all the way down to Whirling Slash 4% to see a segment of the player base who have actually caught wind of what's happening here. 61% isn't all of it, okay? Presumably, that remaining gap is also players who are scaling their movement speed via the increased movement speed stat, oblivious to the fact that attack speed is a far superior way to scale, which I'm about to show you right now. Now, when it comes to a player who would play a Lightning Arrow Deadeye, I know exactly what floats their boat. They do so with the presupposition that they're playing the fastest, strongest, best overall, smoothest leveling experience, strongest endgame, single target, clear, etc. The best build. They want the best, the fastest. And so here is an early endgame Roa build. This character had roughly 50% increased movement speed, not counting Tailwind, not counting the Roa buff, which took you up to a little over 70%. And it took me 13 seconds to travel from the top to the end of the Molten Vault. I decided to make a nice little test run to show you guys just how big of a difference it is when you compare this to attack speed as a means of moving fast. This is a comparably geared early endgame attack speeds build. In both cases, I showcased an actual rotation for the build, in this case twisters versus lightning arrow. And wouldn't you see, it was in roughly half the time it took me to travel from point A to point B. Half the time on a similar invested character. Now, how was I able to move this fast? What, did I do it through attribute stacking? No. Did I do it through accuracy stacking? No. I did it virtually free of charge. Here they are side by side, equally geared. Movement speed scaling Roa versus attack speed scaling whirling slash. If you want to move as fast as you possibly can in this game, you're not using movement speed as a way to do it. I don't know how I can make it any clearer than this. It took me half the time to reach the end. Now hold on a second here. I showcased 50%-ish movement speed Roa. Well, I'm sure there are many of you about to type out, yeah, but I go 200% increased movement speed. I've got an endgame. I've taken it all the way. That's not really indicative of how fast we can go. We can go 200% increased movement speed. That's the end. That's the goal. Okay. I'll let you know now, I chose 50% deliberately because 50% increased movement speed is exactly half the movement rate of 200% increased movement speed, which means if I had showcased 200% increased movement speed, it would have been in roughly half the time, which incidentally puts you right on par with low budget whirling slash movement. Here's what a little bit more budget looks like on the whirling slash movement. This is my current character as I have it set up. Now, it's a little bit faster, nothing crazy, and that's because I'm not attribute stacking or accuracy stacking still. I'm not going crazy on gear. I've still not made any major sacrifices to get that extra speed. I've simply got a much better corrupted weapon and actually gotten some real gloves that are ironically the same gloves that lightning arrow high-end build use. So truly no sacrifice there at all. Now, I want to do you guys some justice here and not just talk hypotheticals or even just use tests to see how fast something moves. I'm going to show you some actual gameplay and we're going to see them side by side. I've chosen to open Spicy Sushi's profile here. I'm not singling him out for any particular reason other than the fact that he's a big name content creator who happens to have a currently up-to-date, super high-end, pinnacle geared lightning arrow Deadeye with 197% increased movement speed. Here's just some good old-fashioned Roa gameplay, courtesy of Spicy Sushi. Except he got off the Roa. I don't know why, still got the buff. But anyway, this is what 197% increased movement speed in the hideout will get you. And, you know, if you're some meta follower looking at this thinking, wow, this is what I have to look forward to. This is really nice. Look at that clear. Look at that speed. He's just absolutely booking it. Nothing can stand in his way. And if you didn't know any better, you might say this is the pinnacle of PoE2. This is as good as it can possibly get, right? Well, you don't know what you don't know, obviously. That goes for everybody. And that is why I'm going to slide in this content from the right, whirling slash, booking it to the combat. And this will give you some sense of what it looks like to move with attack speed instead of movement. Side by side, okay? You got the perfect comparison. And I know this is going to be treated like a comparison between lightning arrow versus twister, and that's fine and all. But I do want to explicitly say that is not the purpose of this video. I want you to hone in specifically on the mobility, the movement of it, how it moves, how quickly it can get from point A to point B. And you know, I just want you to recognize this is relatively difficult content on both ends, and this is what it looks like to be running around with whirling slash. Now, the cool thing is, just because you might think that one build looks better than the other doesn't mean you can't take elements from one build and apply it to the other. Now, I suspect if memory serves me right, some people are going to say, yeah, well, twister, whirling slash, that's all super annoying. Look, I can just be on a Roa and just move around and press one button. That's super easy. I don't want to have to go and have a rotation, multiple different buttons or whatever. So let's just see what we're doing here. We're pressing W, A, S, and D to move around, and we're tapping right click, single target. Now, this is whirling slash. What am I doing here? Well, I'm no longer pressing W, A, S, or D. I'm simply moving around with a mouse cursor, guiding it like I was on Windows desktop or something. Holding whirling slash as right click and occasionally pressing 2, then 4, like once every 3 seconds. That's really not a whole lot different, in my opinion. But here's the thing, you don't have to do that. Here's the most important footage of the entire video, right here. You can simply incorporate the tech of whatever build you're playing. Fast attacks-based build, already built in a bunch of attack speed. You can completely remove movement speed scaling and all the cost-benefit ratio from that. Much cheaper, easier, faster moving, and with fewer buttons. So I invite you to borrow this tech for your own build, whatever it is. I want to revisit Spicy Sushi's profile here, just to help illustrate what I mean when I say movement speed as a stat is a scam, okay? Here's one example. These boots. Care to guess how expensive these boots are? 30% increased movement speed, implicit on top of 30% increased movement, explicit, with some pretty good modifiers otherwise. Well, if I ignore those other modifiers, and I simply populate 30% increased movement speed, 3 rune sockets with increased effect of socketed items, because those are the important roles here, you can see the starting price is 17 divines. And again, that's with junk affixes otherwise. Care to guess how much my boots cost? Less than a divine. Because I don't need any movement speed. So not only do I get super cheap boots, I actually get more effective boots, because I get implicit that offer me something else, and I get an extra prefix that doesn't need to be allocated towards movement speed. Here's another big kicker, especially on the top end. From Nothing Jewel, Val Pact. This jewel, the purpose of this jewel, and you guys know how powerful jewel slots are, right? It gives you momentum. With the armor he has, this is 3% increased movement speed. 3% more, 2% more, 2% more. And nothing else is allocated around Val Pact. That means he has opted to blow a jewel slot, one of the most powerful unique jewels, and 4 passive points, all for the extreme power of 10% increased movement speed. Let's juxtapose that with the version that I'm running. A jewel slot, From Nothing, Walker of the Wilds. You might know this one. And here's the kind of power you can get it when you allocate it intuitively, especially if you layer it on top of a time-lost sapphire. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 freely allocated points that offer untold amounts of power, especially in conjunction with the overlaid time-lost sapphire. I don't really think I need to express just how much more player power it is offering me here than it was in the case of 10% increased movement speed. Now here's yet another example of the unfortunate result of just going all in movement speed. You don't even get to start on the powerful side of the tree with all the attack speed, which is still an important stat for this build, the projectile speed, the damage, proj damage. No, instead you're getting some little evasion points just to get a little bit extra movement speed and trying to beeline off to stats, because you need as many passive points as you can to get around to as many spots as you can to get any and all extra movement speed that possibly exists on the tree. And if one thing you'll notice is a trend here, in that in virtually every case where you're getting movement speed, you're sacrificing something for it, whether it's on the tree, whether it's on the boots, whether it's the 60 spirit to run a Roa. It comes with major sacrifices. Now, is all this to say it's an outright mistake to go 60% increased movement speed boots and to completely sacrifice a jewel slot just for 10% increased movement speed? Well, no, not if you are operating under the rubric that movement speed is the most important stat. You've set up a build that way, and that you're running on the Roa, and that everything you're trying to do is to that end. You would make enormous sacrifices to do that. Now, unfortunately, my own profile isn't pulling up on PoE Ninja. I don't know, I'll try to get that fixed, but here's the build I'm running. On the max roll guide, this exists down below, and we're going to use this to show you the difference of what it means to actually scale attack speed, how to do it, and by the end of watching this, you're going to understand that I made virtually no sacrifice, nowhere near as much sacrifice as, for example, Spicy Sushi did, to get nearly 200% increased movement speed. First off, I actually get to take the good points. I get to prioritize damage. And then you'll notice there's a split between red and green. Okay, green is all damage. Okay, these points are going for damage. Damage there, damage here. This, for some reason, keeps breaking down every time I do it. There we go. Damage there. Some more damage here. Some more damage here. And then you'll notice red is all speed. Attack speed here. Skill speed here. Attack speed. Attack speed. Attack speed accuracy. A whole bunch of attack speed down here. Now what's going on? These are weapon set points that are gifted freely to you as a player in the campaign. You can use them by assigning weapon sets. Have a weapon in set 1, a weapon in set 2. You can even put the same weapon in both sets. But the point is you get to divide your build into 2 different modes of gameplay. One, you can focus on something like speed, and the other you can focus on something like damage. And up until 0.3, that came with a heavy cost of a weapon swap delay that no longer exists. Now in terms of the numbers, what you find if you go in and add up all the movement speed nodes that Spicy Sushi took in his build, in the endgame Deadeye build, 48% was the number. 48% increased movement speed. It's a lot of movement speed, but across both weapon sets. There's no weapon set point allocation divided there. It comes at the heavy cost of having to be applied to your primary damage skill as well as whatever hypothetical off skill you might have. However, in my case, I got 154% increased attack speed, most of which was designated to weapon 1, but in some cases where there was crossover, it was essentially no cost because they were points that I would have taken either way. I would have taken them, just to do more damage. And lest we forget, attack speed is not just good for movement in the context of this video, it's still good for damage. You're double dipping in the value of attack speed, whereas if you're prioritizing movement speed, you get no value out of it aside from its explicit purpose of helping you move faster. You want to hear something even more crazy? If you actually break down the numbers on that speed test I did, what you will find is that 1% increased attack speed is just about the equivalent of 1% increased movement speed, just in terms of movement alone. Now how could that possibly be? That sounds absolutely ridiculous. Well, it's because 0.3 came with even more tools that are essentially free in the form of rapid attacks 2 or 3. I like 2 because I still like to do damage, but you can do 3 if you want. Rage 3, 15% more attack damage while you're not at maximum rage. Oh yeah, guess what? If you do this, you get damage on your ranged attacks. You get rage. Free rage for everybody. I actually forgot to include that in the video until now. Whoops. You also get Rigwald's Ferocity, 20% more attack speed. That's a big number. You can have access to all 3 of these, and you still get to whatever extent you are accuracy stacking. I think I get about 22% increased attack speed for heightened accuracy 2. I'm not accuracy stacking, but they actually did buff passive accuracy per dex point per level. And so at level 96, I still actually have a lot of accuracy. Even though I have 0 on gear, I still get 22% increased movement speed, or rather attack speed, or I guess both in this case, through this support gem. The only other gem is this one, which the most recent video was about. And so if there was ever a question on how good the build is at driving through hordes of enemies, well, get a load of this footage. Look at this. Just straight up can't be stopped. I don't even have to kill anything. I can just show this to you as a demonstration. So there you go, everybody. That basically concludes the video. I feel like I'm just standing on the sidelines and I'm looking around, everybody's got their head buried in the sand. I firmly believe that if more people were aware of just how ridiculously easy, cheap, cost-effective it is to scale your movement speed via attack speed, more people would do it, whether they're playing Lightning Arrow or anything else that's down on the right-hand side of the tree. Because all you have to do is allocate 1 passive point to Dance with Death Keystone, buy yourself a really fast spear, take off that Roa, get 60 spirit back, by the way, and sub it in with Whirling Slash for the 5 supports that I mentioned earlier on, and that's it. That's all you have to do. You would basically move as fast as you would be moving with 200% increased movement speed if you did that at minimum. So with that, I'd appreciate it if you guys share this video. Normally I don't ask that request, but clearly people need to know. Movement speed is a dead stat. This is not even new news, but it is certainly a growing trend. The tools that we have been given recently have made this Evidently so. There's no arguing against it now. And so I'd appreciate it if you guys inform the community. You can play Whirling Slash Twister, you can play Whirling Slash Lightning Arrow, you can play Whirling Slash whatever the hell you want. There's certainly got to be a way to do it. And that's not even to mention the other skill that also works well. If you want to see what real speed looks like, go Hollow Palm, put a bunch of evasion gear on, and put Tempest Flurry in there with those exact same supports I used. Because if you ain't done that, you ain't seen nothing yet. That's going to be it for now. We're going to go back to live streaming some of that awesome Whirling Slash off meta movement content, and we'll see if we can't turn a few heads in the process. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.